I could see stuff like that throwing people for a loop. So what are our job descriptions, and how do we enunciate to candidates like what they're going to be running into when they get to camp?
Yeah. And let's be real about that, because I don't think most of us on the webinar could just roll out our job descriptions from last year, which is the kind of knee-jerk reaction we all want to do. It's like, well, I've got this down pretty well, talking about this job. Here's the job description. Most of us, we, used that one that, sort of the sample that ACA gave us, and we've been rolling with it ever since. But, we all know very well that the jobs that we are talking about have changed in a lot of dramatic ways that you're not necessarily able to write down. I mean, obviously you need to go through, just like you said, Sarah, and make sure that everything that you're doing needs to be on that list as well, so you can clearly talk about it. Yes, cleaning the bathrooms is a part of the job, but culturally speaking, it's changed those jobs. The expectations that these young people have on them, a lot of them are front and center with parents. A lot of the day camps, we're talking about seeing these folks twice a day. So we just need to respect that the jobs have changed a little bit and really make sure that we're doing that, or we're talking about those in a really clear way.
And Doug posted an article from the Times this week. That was a great article. I agreed with some of it. I disagreed with some of it, but it was like definitely a good read, thinking about why more teens, especially older teens, have severe anxiety in the U.S. And it made me think about how at camp during staff training, we're like, this is such an important job. Children's lives are in your hands. You have to do all the things, which is like all true. But sometimes the way that we're framing the job could contribute to that anxiety and make people who feel like they have to be perfect in every way, like second guess themselves or their decision. So how do we build up people's confidence and their ability, not just to like know what the job is, but know that they have the skills to make the call. So I think some of it comes to teaching like decision-making skills during staff training, instead of teaching like, this is the way you have to do it, because we all know at camp, totally weird things happen and like we can't train on everything. So if we can teach decision-making skills and reinforce to people that they have the skills to make critical decisions, that is some good prep work that we can do.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other bit, I don't want to get too much into this because I don't want this webinar to turn into like the interview questions webinar. But, as far as that screening side, I think the more we can send young people through a battery of questions that have them think about their experience and talk about their experience back at you. So when they were anxious, when they were nervous, when they were in a situation that was really challenging, like what happened, how did they overcome, or how did they not, how did they fail in those moments and what happened? I think talking about those kinds of things will not only give you that kind of eye-opening moment in interviews, but will actually give you then the sort of fuel into what you just talked about, knowing your staff and how they handle stress, for example, or anxiety. That would be a great sort of backdrop to staff training, just like you were talking about, and really teaching people, sort of the skills that they need to be able to exercise on the ground. Like, I think gone are the days that we can give them some sort of script and they can go out there and just like deliver a camp based on the words that we're telling them. I mean, we've got to give them some skills that they can get out there and sort of use in real time. The last thing I'm going to say about this is the soapbox that you will all hear me stand on, I think, for the rest of my time, at least this year's soapbox, which is this. I think one of the big reasons why we're seeing so many staff mental health breaks and everyone's feeling stressed out is because we're not hiring enough people. Just as an industry, we're not hiring enough people. We use the ratios that ACA and health department and state licensing and all these folks give us as some sort of sort of standard mark. I mean, it's a minimum ratio, and I think we got to all turn around to our bosses and our organizations and try to get more in our budget for salaries, because I think we need to just all hire more people. Just as a blanket assessment of the entire industry, I think we all need to hire more people.
Yeah, and I think I've had staff with struggles with their mental health while they're at camp in the summer, and sometimes it feels personal to you, but at the end of the day, most of the time it's not about you if someone's struggling with their mental health at camp, and it's hard not to take that personally. Like, to me, camp was so fulfilling. It was where I felt I was at the best in my mental health, whereas some of our staff might be having the opposite reaction or that sort of thing. So figuring out, okay, like, how do I look at this situation with love and care and objectivity, and not think like, okay, I need to like completely destroy everything that I'm doing because two staff had a breakdown, but say, okay, what does this mean? How do I change? And how is the staff experience evolving in a rapid way? So when I was a counselor 10 years ago, we didn't have social media and we didn't have smartphones, right? And so I had no idea what my friends at home were doing. And now a counselor who is feeling the struggle of camp might also be having like FOMO or fear of missing out of like what's going on at home. And that is like doubly taxing, or they're getting a lot of different messages and can't stay in the moment at camp. So it can be tough. And so kind of coming from that point of understanding is important. Is Scott frozen or am I frozen? Scott, are you frozen? Okay. That's just fine. Okay, it's me. Hi, everyone. While he logs back on, we can kind of start with another question here. But I think that question, we only scratched the surface on that question, and so I'm sure it'll keep coming up. The other thing I would say is I think people need to have very clear guidelines in place for what it means to have staff time off because people are having health issues, whether those are mental health, physical health, or because they need like family vacations. And one of the policies I had is like, if you need to miss more than like 2 days in a week-long session, you just need to take that whole session off. And I don't want to get into the details of that, but thinking about at the end of the day, we're protecting the camper experience. And so if there's a way to accommodate, if people do need time off, for them to have the whole time off, so it's not like people coming in and out as counselors and disrupting the campers, that sort of thing, that can be powerful to have that stuff set up in advance. And then as Scott said, have enough backups so that it's not like a huge disaster if someone does have to take a week off, et cetera. Okay. So the next question that I think would be fun to talk about is Facebook complaints. So this person wrote, a parent posted an issue to our Facebook page before ever talking to me. It became a platform for anyone who ever had an issue to post about it. Things that happened 5 or more years ago were coming up. So, okay, I'm sorry that happened to you. Like that's really crummy. And I think we all live in this world where we're kind of like afraid that everything that we do is public and can be interpreted in a very public way. So I don't remember what it was. Someone wrote that in tandem to that, like parents believe everything their campers say. So a camper came home and said, we didn't have lunch today. And suddenly, like, maybe that's a lie. Maybe they didn't like what there was for lunch. Like there could be 100 different interpretations of that situation. And then suddenly, the parent posts on social media, like, you aren't feeding the kids, as you said, or, the train could really run away with that type of situation. And so I think that the first thing to figure out is, how do you monitor your social media pages in a way that doesn't drive you crazy? Because you can't be spending all of your time checking up on the social media pages. So figuring out who can we delegate that responsibility to, especially during the summer, and how do we take some cues from the big companies and just respond right away. Like I complain on Twitter all the time to airlines when I'm doing camp consulting things, and they've done like terrible things to us, like just not responding when we have issues, or we're delayed for no particular reason, et cetera. And the airlines always respond right away, like, thank you for the input. Here's how we're going to help. So figuring out how do you get someone to respond right away, and then how do you kind of shut it down? And then the third leg to that is, Willie had a great comment in the chat there, setting a timeline for your social media, just like your email. And then the third leg to that is, who are your advocates that can post good things about you on social media. So that war starts to happen, and obviously you don't want to engage in a war on social media, but instead of taking it down, it'd be much better to have a couple advocates that you can call on, such as board members, such as trusted longtime parents. And I would call and I'd say, hey, Judy, it's Sarah. This thing happened. I feel really pinched because it's not true and rumors are being spread on social media. Could you go on and like describe your child's experience and say like, Sarah's always happy to talk with families one-on-one about any concerns. She'll respond right away and like provide my email address. So figuring out who are some other people that we can get to advocate for us before the train goes so far down the road that we've lost it and that sort of thing. I wonder what happened to Scott. I wonder if like his, I can talk for a whole another half an hour, so I'm not that concerned, but I miss him. He's my friend. So fingers crossed he gets back on. All right, let me think about what the other question is I want to handle without him. He hates social media, so that was low-hanging fruit. He's so funny about that. It's his least favorite thing. Okay. Let's see here. This one's funny. It says, it was my most challenging summer yet, period. That was the only comment that they wrote on our online form. So we feel you. Everyone has the most challenging summer, but you did it. It's over. All right. One with some more specifics that we can actually talk about. So this person writes, we offer free before and after day camp care. We had so much trouble keeping that time structured and organized so that parents didn't see the organized chaos. Our parents complained that our program wasn't of high quality, but they were only seeing the drop-off and pickup program and not all of the awesome things that we did all day. How can we add enough structure to our before and after camp programming to keep parents happy, but keep it loose enough that campers and counselors can do whatever floats their boat? So this is a day camp question, but I also think it applies to resident or overnight camp, right? Because kids are there for several days, but in any case, all the parents are seeing are the pickup and drop-off portions, or the drop-off and pickup portions of the day. And quite frankly, if we kind of took a step back and were secret shoppers or pretended to be parents during those times of day, they can be very crazy. Like the lines can be long. Kids might be just like in like, I don't know, at our campus in like a holding pen area, like the kids are basically on tennis courts. So we could like keep them all contained and like, people don't know what's up. And if that's the only snapshot they're getting of camp, that could give them a negative image. The other thing with this question that I think is interesting is, especially in a day camp setting, when we have before and after care, we have to ask ourselves, where are our best counselors who are most capable of interacting with parents during that time? And at overnight camp, where are those counselors as well? So if you have your best counselor or your lead counselors, they might not be the people that come for the 7 a.m. shift or the 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. shift, when in reality, that's when a lot of parents are interacting with staff and getting first impressions. So I'd say the first thing when looking at this question is just simple logistical positioning of where kids are, and then where staff are, and which staff are interacting with our parents during these critical times. So I think the first thing I would look at is just how things go. And then the other thing that I would look at is what are my pickup and drop-off windows? So for instance, like when I worked at our YMCA, I did aftercare, and parents could pick up their kids anytime between 4 and 6. So it was very difficult because you couldn't really do like structured activities because kids kept getting pulled and that sort of thing. So that happens at camp pickup and drop off as well. So the other question I would have is, logistically, can we narrow our pickup and drop off windows so kids aren't just like waiting around to be plucked at any point over the course of 2 hours? And you know, what makes the most sense for us in that way? And what are games? How can we crowdsource things that we can do during those times? Okay, so what I'm going to do is take about a 30-second break and see if I can help Scott. So I'm going to mute and stop my video. So stretch it out, and I'll be back in about 30 seconds. Okay. Okay, so before the jokes get any more risque in the in just some gentle swearing over there in the chat. I just got a message from Scott. He thinks the internet is out, but he's trying from his hotspot. So he is doing the best that he can. But I am ready to kind of pose another question to the group. So let's get a good one. Okay, so gosh, that one is hard. Okay, so this one is simple question, but I think it's one that's really complex, which is, what's the best way to discourage cell phone and technology use at camp? And they didn't specify camper or counselor. I'm going to take the counselor route to start, and then we'll go from there. So a lot of us have a policy that is that people aren't allowed to use cell phones or technology at camp. Now, we've done a lot of debate on this recently in our summer camp society cohorts, which has been really interesting, thinking about when we tell kids, no, you can't have your cell phone at camp, that can be a really stressful thing. And when we tell staff that as well, that can be stressful. And oftentimes we say, oh, it's good for you to disconnect. But in reality, kids and young adults have what they would consider to be very real business on their phone. So for us, we have real like work business. But for kids, a lot of times kids have things that they find to be very serious tied to their phones and their social standing, right? So they might have like a streak going on Snapchat where they've gone back and forth with a friend for 300 days in a row or that sort of thing. And the news that they have to disconnect can be really, really jarring for the campers. Oh, Scott said he's back. Oh my gosh. Unmute. Scott?
I'm back.
Oh my gosh. Yay, we missed you. We were
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. A hotspot seems to be working. It must be the internet at your house.
Must be.
So I was just starting to broach the question of cell phones at camp. And I was saying, like, from our chairs as directors or camp leaders, we have this like kind of high and mighty viewpoint that it's good for kids to disconnect and like they need that disconnection from technology. But trying to see it from the kid or young adult point of view, a lot of kids and young adults have what they would consider, and Jack would say this as well, that's where I got this, kids have really real business on their phone, whether it's like how they keep up with their social media. This Christina from Hidden Bay said a girl was coaching a friend through a crisis by cell phone, right? And so kids are so connected, and a lot of times we think like, oh, kids are just like doing games or like they're addicted to their phones, but like, what does that mean for them? And so I think the first point I come to is like trying to build empathy around like what we're actually asking kids and young adults to do when we ask them to disconnect versus just saying like, disconnect, like it'll be great. So then how to, to fill in the missing pieces to actually make that happen is your next step. But you have to figure out like, why is that kind of a big ask?
It's a huge ask. And I think gone are the days that we can just like expect that what we're doing is going to fill that void in without, as you saying, sort of, as you're saying, being very articulate and clear about it, saying, hey, we don't want you to sort of do this mode of friendship. We have this other mode of friendship that we'd like you to try for this weekend. And we've got to start building, we got to start being active about that, like talking about what that means for young people. I mean, it's interesting. Sarah and I just a couple weekends ago led a director's camp, our 7th or 8th. And one of the things that we do is we ask everybody to, shut their phones off for the weekend. And it's funny to even watch adults do it. Like we have a hard time doing what we're asking them to do for a week or two, or for some of us who are running, 7 and 8 week programs, it's all summer long. So unplugging like that, I think is it's important to get that sense of empathy that Kurtz is talking about. I think the other thing that makes a lot of sense to me is that what we need to do is understand that like that's where kids are. And that's sort of everything that their culture, that they're coming with. So how can we, instead of just making that big ask, how can we sort of turn it around and start using that technology for our sort of programmatic purposes and what we're trying to do for kids at camp. So the example that I use, I was just talking to one camp about this down south, who said that what they'd like to do is they'd like to get a bunch of digital cameras, teach digital photography, teach Photoshop and how to manipulate that kind of stuff, and then put together memory books for everybody. Like that will be like a class project, is that they'll put together memory books. And what they were trying to say is like, while that's not a new idea necessarily in camp, one of the things that they want to do is try to bridge that technology gap and actually say that stuff out loud. Like, yeah, we're not going to let you be on your phone necessarily, but we're going to have access to X, Y, or Z as far as the technology at our camp. And just, I don't know, talking really honestly about what that means.
Yeah. And how do we partner with parents to have the expectations to kids, and how do you partner with staff to have the expectations clear to them before the session even starts? Like, has anyone ever had one of those parents that like just doesn't tell their kid about the cell phone rule and then just like makes you the bad guy or gal at check-in? And that is the worst too, because we're like, oh, we're off to a good start. And let me tell you about screens, or like, it's just like one thing after another. And so thinking about how do we have lines of communication with parents and campers before camp even starts, and other people to tell that story. So I always advocate for like webinars or orientation sessions that you can do with new campers and new parents before camp starts, where they can hear from a camper. Like, I was really freaked out to not have my cell phone, and I put up a thing on Instagram that I was going to be at camp, so people knew about it, and my life didn't end. Like, it was okay. So like, how do you help kids hear from other kids who have more social capital than you with them that this was an okay idea, is a really good start. And then thinking about from the counselor side of things, how do you keep counselors off their phones at camp? I mean, Scott, what have you found works, doesn't work, that sort of thing? I mean, I feel like there has to be buy-in, because otherwise adults are really sneaky and just end up pretending that they have to use the bathroom for 30 minutes and make that their like mobile office.
Yeah, and it's also hard too, because like nobody owns a camera, right? And so everyone wants to have their phone to be able to take pictures. And, like, I know we all have different policies, like, and all these policies are, you're kind of damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Like, there's not a, you really got to thread the needle. I mean, as far as what's worked for me in the past, as far as keeping phones away, is just a level of trust. I have found that coming at staff saying, look, if you have your phone, it's like for one of these reasons, I'm trusting that there's an emergency issue or something going on that you just need to do it, right? Like, and that has always worked for me. Like, I understand that I've, been able to, build a culture around that, and that not all of us are able to do that. And some of us are coming into cultures that are different. But I think what has worked for us in the past is to have a policy, be clear about it, and then for all of us to follow it. Even though I'm the camp director, if no phones are out, then no phones are out. If I'm the camp director and I need to have my phone for, let's say, emergency reasons, then okay, but then I shouldn't be on my phone at dinner or anywhere else that's clearly not an emergency. So it's just about, I think, policies, and then how we build the culture around those and drive all of that towards like a respectful and respect-based environment where we're like, this is the rule and here's why. Like, let's talk about it if we need to, as far as getting into the philosophy behind it, but this is the rule, so this is what we do.
Yeah, and I like starting that conversation even during interviews and ask, like, this is a rule that we have. Why do you think we have this rule? And why do you think this is hard for people? Or even to returning staff, I've said, last year we had a problem with staff using cell phones too frequently, and I believe it affected the camper experience. What do you think we can do as a camp leadership team to make that ask easier for the rest of the staff, or get more staff buy-in? Or is this a policy that we need to change? And just like hash it out in the interview, setting. And then figuring out, kind of like Peter's saying in the chat, how do you find the other things that counselors will say, like, well, I need my phone for that. And so that's watches, alarm clocks, cameras, like Peter's comment, music players, that sort of thing. I got a ton of donations one year of like old iPods that we loaded with music and like passed around to people, because when your phone is out, you're going to look at it. And if you're asking people not to have their phone, the comment of like, oh, it's just for music, is just a slippery slope, because it's not on airplane mode. And before you know it, the 13-year-old boys are watching South Park on the camper's, smartphone in the cabin. Not that happened to me ever, but
no, definitely not. Never happened when Kurtz was at the helm.
Just an example from a friend. So thinking about, what does it really mean, and what is our policy, what is our practice, and are those things consistently aligned, and like being out and about enough that if you're always in the office, people are always on their phones, but like, am I walking from cabin to cabin at night and like saying goodnight to people and like seeing what's going on? Am I walking around at rest hour? Am I there in the morning, sometimes during day camp, early drop off, to see like what's happening? I think the more present I am as a supervisor who's role modeling that expectation, and who is seeing how other people are interpreting that expectation, the more enforceable it is.
Yeah. And then just like with kids, right? If it's not okay today, it's not okay tomorrow, it's not okay next week. If it's not okay for, the person that I kind of don't like and I think is awkward, it's also not okay for my very favorite staff member. It's just not okay. If it's not okay for you, it shouldn't be okay for me. All those consistency pieces. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to drive now, because you missed a little bit in the middle where I just willy-nilly answered some questions.
Oh, sweet. And I've also got 12 more minutes.
12 more minutes. Okay, this is a good one. By the end of the summer, my whole staff was down on themselves and had overall negative energy. There was lots of pushback against the admin team and camp festivities. There were a lot of rumors. The food service director quit. This was really overwhelming to this person as a director. So how do I prevent this like kind of end of summer combo of burnout and drama from happening? That's a summary. There were more details, but to protect the person's identity, that's all we'll share.
Okay. So part of that description sounds like, just another day in paradise. Like that's you just kind of nailed it for a lot of us. We go through these cycles, and sometimes you have summers exactly like that. And so I wanted to just like step back a little bit and just like give everybody that moment to take a big deep breath. Here we are in October. Some of us are coming off of the worst summer of our lives. Some of us are coming off the best summer of our lives. As a lot of us are somewhere in between. And yes, that happens, and I feel for you, whoever it is, that it's terrible that you had that sort of like downward spiral at the end of your summer. The one thing that I'm going to come back to, I already said it once, so I won't say it too long-winded of a way. Let's hire more staff. I feel like if we are constantly operating where all hands are on deck, midsummer and end of the summer burnout is sort of like inevitable. People are giving so much of themselves physically and emotionally all the time that if we're just starting the summer with, okay, all hands are on deck, then we're setting ourselves up that way. I also think that we need to create a culture where feedback is okay, where criticisms are sort of combined with a solution, sort of problem solving sort of focus, like we're tackling challenges and all that kind of stuff. And I think it starts now. I think it starts in how you're talking to the staff that you're recruiting for next year. It's about how you're doing some interviewing with old, returning staff and with new staff. What are the things that we're talking about when it comes to that kind of growth mindset and problem solving sort of framework for things like how are we talking about overcoming challenges from the get? And I think if we can do a couple of those things, we're setting ourselves up for then a lot of those kind of midsummer things that we can do at end of the summer, whether those are staff appreciation things, more time off, a little bit of downtime, whatever it is. We can't just do those things in isolation, I guess is what I'm saying. We have to set up the whole summer that way and the whole culture that way.
Yeah. And I think that staff drama and burnout are interrelated at the end of the summer, right? Because people are bored. And so some people like to create drama to not be bored anymore. And so my point with this, thinking about staff burnout, is one of the points the writer said was that people are down on like the different festivities and themes at the end of the summer. And so I think that during staff training, as much as you can, listing out, brainstorming, and prioritizing the awesome themes and festivities that you're going to have during the summer with them as the creators is really important. And then saving some of those like dessert for the end of the summer, right? So a lot of times we want to do our very best themes like in week 2, 3, because we're so excited about it. But can we deliberately save like the best day of the summer to come in week 9 and week 10? Can we kind of pace ourselves a little bit better so we have that dessert at the end? We have those traditions that are only week 9 and 10 to like look forward to, or the last day of the week, or that sort of thing, so that people feel bored and burned out and like feel the need to create drama because of their own like dissatisfaction with what's going on. So can we like distract them in a way by saving some of those things?
I love the idea of saving some of that stuff for the end. I think that is such a motivator in and of itself, especially those things that staff created. So I love that idea.
Well, and saving supplies and that sort of thing till the end. I don't know who else does this, but I would order all my friendship bracelet string at the beginning of the summer and then squirrel most of it away so that by 4th session, it's not just like brown and yellow friendship bracelet string, and all the other colors are gone and that sort of stuff, or like everything's tangled in a knot. So like people are getting fresh supplies throughout the summer. There's new things inserted into the menu if you're serving food week 7 and 8, that sort of thing. So, thinking about that pacing and some of that stuff we can easily fabricate ourselves as the camp leaders. This is a great point too. Some of that drama is when people are thinking more about life outside of camp. Can we give folks an opportunity to take care of some of their outside of camp business during the day? Can we be a little bit more flexible with time off periods, or offering some office time for folks who need to do college schedules or secure apartment leases or that sort of stuff, so it doesn't intrude on the camp day, but instead there's a time chiseled out for it. Chiseled is a hard word to say on a webinar. Blech. Chisel out. Okay. All right, Scott, how about this one? How do you enforce no drinking and drugs policy on your staff time off, especially when they have a full 24 hours off, outside constant drug and breathalyzer tests, so the person doesn't want to do that? The idea of time off is to come back rejuvenated and energized, not more tired and hungover. How to get the staff to use their time off to recharge and not to party.
Well, so one thing I just want to sort of take issue with is the sort of premise of the question that somehow we know what resting and relaxing for a bunch of 19-year-olds is. I sort of a long time ago, I let go of the idea that you have to do what I would choose to do to rest and relax, because I think it's just different. I mean, I'm 43, so I'm sure what I choose to do and what a 19-year-old chooses to do to rest is different, I would assume. Maybe not, but probably. So let's let go of that a little bit. I think there's two separate issues here. One, really creating a culture of self-care and the idea that time off is about rejuvenating and, getting ready for more kids. And then the idea, the sort of problem of drug and alcohol abuse. So if you feel like you have to sort of constantly drug test everybody and kind of have a breathalyzer constantly going at check-in every night from time off, then I think there's like a bigger issue going on, and I think you need to really think about it sort of currently in the off season, and maybe make some of those really hard decisions about cleaning house. And we are not going to have certain elements back at our camp. I think now's a perfect time to really take a look at what's going on culturally with your staff. And if that means making some really hard decisions about some all-stars not being able to come back because that's a part of that culture, then you have to be able to sit down with your team and really talk through some of what that might mean. But of course, I think most of us are in between somewhere where it's like, nah, that's not really my problem. My problem is just that they party a little too hard, and I want them to party less hard. So give them some more options, in my opinion. I think a lot of times young people are choosing to do that kind of stuff because there's not a lot of options, whether those things are on camp, whether it's more camp-sponsored events, whether it's more time off, but in sort of a less consistent way. So instead of 1 24-hour period off, maybe we're giving them 3 6-hour periods off. I know that doesn't add up, but just 4 6-hour periods off, whatever. It's not math camp, who cares? But the whole point is, give them a little bit of space, and let's try to create a culture around that space and give them the tools to make better decisions, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also say that some of the stuff is structural that we do. So if we're giving 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. off for a 24-hour period, if I get really drunk on Tuesday night starting at 6 p.m., I think, well, I have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to not be hungover anymore, to recover. So are we setting our counselors up to be able to easily justify their decisions, just how we've structurally set up maybe our time off or that sort of thing. Yeah. The other thing I would say, almost with all of these questions that we're experiencing, I feel like every single question that we've covered today just comes back to how good your middle management is. So how good are your head counselors, your returning staff, the people that have social and professional capital at your camp? So basically, no matter what you say as a camp director, your counselors are going to listen to the cool or the experienced counselors that you have on your team, your unit leaders, these types of folks. And so figuring out, how do I first get those folks really on board with the things that are critical to my camp's values and mission, and then figure out, how do I have them as my key MVPs on the team to get the other counselors to make the choices that they need to make to fulfill the values and mission, right? So I feel like that is the crux of a lot of this mental health stuff. Are our counselors looking out for each other? It's the crux of the cell phone debate. Our head counselors on their phones, all of these things that all relate to these folks that are so important. Scott, do you
and that drive it, and that the things that we think are these huge cultural shifts, right? The thing that would take, as Steve McGuire would say, would take the mile to turn around. I think it's exactly those people that you're talking about, Kurtz, that can change, from one session to the next, can change the energy and the flow of the entire staff. So I think getting the buy-in from those folks is crucial.
Yeah. Okay, cool. any kind of big topics on the list there, Scott, that we didn't cover? I know we just like blasted through a ton of information. I did tell them about the person that said it was their most challenging summer.
Challenging summer.
Yeah. Helicopter.
No, I mean, a lot of the, so much of this stuff just points back to everything that we just talked about. The one last piece at the end about sort of bonding and reforming on a leadership team halfway through the summer. Once they've had, obviously had some rocky stuff at the beginning, some challenging stuff right at the beginning. I think where you're going with that, whether we can in 2 minutes give you the best advice about this or not, but where you're going with that question is perfect. We really need to. One of the things that I've said a lot to camp directors is that, I kind of don't need to meet your staff or even see your facility to know whether I would even consider sending my kids to your camp. All I really need to do is meet you, because so much of what camp feels like and how it operates sort of flows from that top. And so if we are taking care of the leadership team and that middle management team in that, we're getting them to bond more over throughout the summer. We're really thinking of the team experience. We're really giving them a good opportunity to debrief from things and preview things before they happen. They're going to in turn create that same kind of atmosphere for the frontline staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would say is sometimes this stuff takes time as well. Like if you're battling a cell phone issue or an end of summer burnout issue, some of those things breaking those rules might be a tradition at your camp. Like our 6th session, like it was traditional that like people slacked off, like people looked forward to that. And like it took a long time to break that down and build it back up the way I wanted. So figuring out which of these things is like a safety issue or a moral issue, and which of these things are things I'm just going to have to work on over time. Okay, so I believe I recorded this correctly, so I will send the link out to everyone on the email list. Thank you for bearing with us for our blip there while Scott disappeared and came back. It was exciting when he returned, so I think it was worth it. And the other thing I would say is that Expert Online Training is starting a new webinar series, which is to help people learn how to be better staff trainers. So to help you better train plan for staff training. And so Scott and Chris Thurber are kicking that off with teaching on a webinar how to teach people about behavior management. So I know it's like a lot of steps, but very cool. So watch for some emails about those, and Scott and I will continue the webinars throughout the school year. So it was fun to see everyone back, and feel free to email us or call us if you have any more questions. But hopefully you got thinking on some new topics. And I will be at ACA Wisconsin. So if that is somewhere that you'll be, I will see you November 9th, my mom's birthday. Sorry, Mom, I'm at a camp conference. But I'm excited to be there. And thanks. Have a great rest of your Thursday. All right. Bye, everybody.